Thank you all for joining us for today's Pulse Series webcast, Making Your Business Social, What You Should Know When Adopting Enterprise 2.0, presented by Jason Noble. My name is Meredith Mead, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for Neudesic and the moderator for today's webcast. This webcast is presented by Jason Noble, Neudesic's General Manager of Product Development. Today's webcast is a part of a series, and we will be keeping you updated on any of the latest ones that will be coming up in the next year. If you're all logged on, you should be able to see the title slide that says Making Your Business Social, What You Should Know When Adopting Enterprise 2.0. There's a brief intro earlier regarding features within Live Meeting. To briefly recap, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the session by typing them in. To ask a question, click on the Q&A verbiage located in the toolbar on the top left side of your screen. Type your question, then click the Ask button. Please note all questions will be held until the end. We will also be using the scene chart feature within Live Meeting. Changing the feedback color within this tool provides feedback to the presenter. To provide feedback, click on the feedback menu found in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Select your feedback color. Your seat in the conference center will display your selected color. Lastly, this webcast is being recorded and will be available via the Neudesic website. We will email you when the link is available. If everyone is ready, please make sure your seat color is green. At this time, I'd like to turn our presentation over to Jason.
Thanks, Meredith. Well, thanks everybody for taking some time out of your Wednesday to talk about adopting Enterprise 2.0 technologies. What we're going to talk about today is, well, first what we'll do is we'll just introduce Enterprise 2.0. Many definitions out there. I think we're going to stick to the one that is most common. We'll also talk about a process for adopting Enterprise 2.0 within your organization. One, should you have one, and if so, what should that look like? We'll also talk about the execution of a pilot for these technologies and actually this cultural shift. There are, once again, competing beliefs that whether a pilot is necessary or not. So what we're going to do is we're going to share with you both the pros and the cons of executing a pilot and some of the things that you should look out for when doing so. We'll also just give you a quick list of some tips, some best practices that we've come across in doing these implementations, both for our customers and as well as internally. And then finally, we'll go through some Q&A, and the practical use cases will be kind of integrated into the conversation. So primarily this webcast is informative in nature. It is applicable across any number of social technologies. It's not necessarily exclusive to Pulse. However, we would highly recommend that you look into Pulse if you have not done so. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So if we look at a traditional definition of Enterprise 2.0, I think that the term was first used all the way back in 2006. If you haven't heard of Andrew McAfee, I suggest you do a little bit of reading on what this guy has to say. He has some great insights. But the way that he defined this was that basically you're looking at the emergence of social software and platforms that are leveraged within the organization, either between companies or their partners and customers. And so if you look at the bold words in there, things like social software, what is the purpose of social software? The purpose in this context is to facilitate the creation of relationships and the discovery of individuals and the conversations and information that they have to share. Being that they're emergent, these should be free-flowing technologies. They should be conducive to open collaboration, which once again kind of butts up against the cultural implications of these types of technologies. And focusing in on the platform, it really should be pervasive across any number of devices to touch the most users within your organization. It's not just about software and tools. It's really about a cultural shift to a more open and free form of collaboration. Again, the tool is just a mechanism to facilitate these types of relationships and conversations. It's definitely not going to fix any lack of collaboration within your organization. So what we recommend doing is address the problem at the same time and figure out how we can increase the people and the relationships and the identification of common values between those people in a more effective manner. All right, so the first thing that you'll ask yourself is there a process by which I can make my enterprise social? So you have, two sides to the story. One is that on the left-hand side, you have somebody who is of the belief system that if you implement a technology that is truly useful and easy, people will just use it. On the opposite side of that, you might have someone that says something to the extent of, well, even if the technology is useful and easy, people will not use it. As we look at how things are adopted in the public domain, we can't necessarily look at those adoption patterns and assume that they're applicable to the enterprise. Bottom line is people just want to get their jobs done, and any tool that is optional by nature, if it's optional and not something that's integrated into their daily lives, they're less likely to use it unless, once again, we promote and we help them to understand why it's useful in their daily lives. Another argument might be, were you told, misspelled, to use Facebook? The answer is clearly no, but if you were to look at kind of the early years of Facebook, at the very beginning, there were not 600 million users, and there was a smaller subset. So getting to a critical mass, getting to a point where there's this tidal wave effect that occurs of adoption is challenging. It didn't happen overnight. It's happened extremely rapidly. Once they got to a certain number of users, it was kind of, the question was always, are you on Facebook? And you kind of felt, out of the loop if you weren't. And that's really where you want to get to with any of these internal social technologies as well. Also, there's this thing that happens within the organization that basically says that, business users they're less likely to go out and explore and just, kind of do extra things within the organization. Usually when they're interacting with their software, it's explicitly to get their job done. So it's really important that when adopting these types of technologies, that you give or that you seed the site or whatever communication tool it is with enough information to entice people to come back. Eventually you want to get to the point where you have things like, did you see that conversation that happened in our product on Pulse today? Or did you reply to that? Or did you see the document that was added? Those are the types of conversations that you want to happen within the enterprise, because then you can see that it's part of your culture. It's part of your way of communicating. All right, so if we were to look at and take a very, very simplistic approach to the belief system that we need not apply process to these social technologies, your process would look pretty simple. It looks something like, well, let's just install the software and then let's send an email. And we're not taking into consideration in this particular process things like organizational change management, marketing the solution internally. So it's just more of, hey, build it and they will come, so to speak. Now, there are some benefits here. Clearly, there's minimal investment as it relates to resources beyond your IT. And if you're leveraging a hosting facility, it's even less of an investment. It also provides a kind of a pure form of natural business value assessment. So if somebody is trained to use a piece of software and they're given all of the ideas as to why this piece of software is valuable, sometimes that actually limits how they perceive the software itself. So once again, you'll get more natural business value assessments for when you minimize the rollout, so to speak. There are a lot of risks related to doing it this way. In deploying these kind of collaboration type technologies for 10 years or so, I've never seen this approach actually work, where you just install the software, send an email, and then people just magically start using it. Where I have seen it work without really any explicit or pragmatic approach is via word of mouth. If you look at something, collaboration software, file sharing software, sometimes those just via word of mouth have pretty significant adoption. So here what we're saying is that, if no one uses this software, does it mean that people are not, or that you're not a social business? If you do this type of a deployment where you just send the email out and people do not come, does that mean that social software does not have a place in your organization? Probably not. Also, even if this software is the most elegant and easy to use piece of software, does that guarantee that people will use it? Absolutely not. It will minimize the barrier to entry for this software, but it definitely does not guarantee that somebody will use what you roll out. So that's one side where we follow no process. We just roll it out and hope that they come. Then on the other side of the extreme, you would have something that is process heavy, process rich, if you will, where you go through some, whether formalized or not, very significant process where you define objectives, you define business values, you identify stakeholders, you try to determine exactly how they feel the software will benefit, or how this Enterprise 2.0 culture shift will benefit the organization. Then possibly you'll set up weekly meetings with everyone. Maybe you'll enlist the enterprise technology services community to establish physical architecture, and then somebody comes in and they'll say, hey, we need to do a checkpoint meeting. Then maybe you'll enlist some other people from information security services to establish privacy, and then you'll move into something where you'll plan it, you'll pilot it, you'll market it, review it, analyze it, and then the whole time you have somebody asking you for status reports. So a very process heavy type of a deployment. So again, there are benefits and disadvantages to this type of an approach. Some of the benefits, and really why enterprises like to have, whether it's a software development methodology or a project implementation methodology, is that we're trying to achieve some sense of predictability within the execution of the project. We also try to establish a roadmap so that at any point, if any key players are removed from the project, we can always have somebody else pick it up. So we want to have a clear map as to where the finish line is. It also ensures that all the necessary stakeholders have contributed and given their input. And hopefully it will allow for some form of a course correction if during the process you notice that something is not going according to plan. So some of the risks that we've seen with these type of heavy processes are that really they're very focused on the project and hitting the check marks and the milestones and the dates. One of the things that we like to encourage our customers to do is that not only focus on, for example, that you have a July 1st delivery deadline to roll out this capability, but how are you going to be judged 6 months after the deployment? What are going to be the metrics by which you determine if this piece of software is actually successful? So don't necessarily just focus on the rollout and making sure that you hit your dates and getting your hardware. Also focus on what to expect in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, because it's really about trying to determine and establish some goals and some objectives. Some of the risks here also is that the investment in time and resources is significantly higher. But once again, if you're rolling out an enterprise initiative, usually there are far more stakeholders involved. The thing about this particular type of technology is that the more folks that you get involved and the more folks that you get using the solution, the more valuable it comes. It's really all about user contributed content. So it's very important to get the right folks involved. Sometimes if you're in an organization that has high compliance requirements, high records retention requirements. It's always a good idea to get the right people involved early on, just so you know your exposure to deploying this type of a capability. Also, some of the risks on this process-rich type of a implementation is that it provides actually an illusion of predictability. So sometimes people stick to the process so diligently that they think that they're actually making real progress. And yes, they are, hitting milestones, hitting dates. But the one thing that we always want to keep an eye on is that even though we do our best to hit those dates, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be successful at the end of the day. So always having an open mind to making sure that the solution is meeting the business objective. So what does this mean? So what we like to do is kind of strike a balance, and in coming up with this content, one of the things that came up was, are we proposing maybe an agile enterprise 2.0 type of a model? And I'm not big on leveraging the latest terms and applying them in other areas, but in this situation, that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're saying minimize the process, do all the right things that you would expect to have to do for larger, maybe ERP type deployments, but take a more iterative approach. And what you'll see later when we talk about executing a pilot, we talk about bringing users online in large chunks, not necessarily all at once, not necessarily a very small subset of 10 to 20 users. We're talking about a very quantitative number of users, and make it very consistent across really any organization of any size. So again, follow the process. Don't necessarily focus on check marks. Clearly, you need to procure hardware. Clearly, you need to install software. But the most important things are, how is this going to affect the culture in 6, 12, 18 months? We also recommend that you engage with HR, legal, and compliance early on. I can almost guarantee that your legal department will say, don't do this. And the reason for that is that it could open you for, there could be an e-discovery issue. Now, having said that, Pulse as a product, we have that figured out, that particular retention and legal issue, e-discovery type issue figured out. So just make sure that whatever tool it is that you go with has a solution around that particular challenge. Also, HR. Guaranteed that HR is going to come to you and say, hey, we don't want to allow people to say anything. That is very dangerous. And really, I think the easiest argument to combat that with is that they have email now. I can guarantee there's an all-employees distribution list. So really, they can distribute or hit everyone with whatever it is that they want to say with the tools that they currently have. Nice thing about these types of technologies, at least Pulse specifically, is that you cannot post anonymously, so it's always part of you. We also give you, the ability to delete improper posts, but really this is a self-governing type of an environment. So getting over that HR hurdle is usually best in terms of the fact that they already have access to email, they can already do these things, and we're not introducing anything radically different. As it relates to compliance, being that this is an internal system, it depends on what industry you're in, whether it's a medical devices industry or some other form of heavily regulated industry. You're going to have differing requirements on compliance. So again, just engage those folks early and make sure that they participate. And also, just remember that your business is not social after you install the product. Microblogging or activity streams, that doesn't make your business social. It's really about, finding champions, making sure that people are using and contributing to this larger knowledge base. There's also something that we like to recommend doing, which is what we call deliberate ignorance, which is going back to the know process attempt at deploying the software. So, for example, if you were to just install the software and send an email, try that. Try that with, maybe if you have plant users or maybe you have people if you're retail, maybe you have people in your store. Attempt to send an email and see what kind of traction you get. If you start to get traction, then maybe your environment is conducive to sending that email. So we just call that deliberate ignorance, where you blindly send a user this invite and see if it actually starts to stick. All right, so next topic that we wanted to talk about was the execution of a pilot. So once again, there are always competing opinions on whether or not to do something. And so some of the things that you'll probably hear if you do research on executing an Enterprise 2.0 pilot would be around the fact that, or the belief system that, if you constrain the number of users in any given social deployment, you reduce what they call as serendipitous connections. So basically, those are the connections that occur in no thought-out, logical manner. They just occur through natural use of the system. An example that we experienced internally was, we're a technology company, so we clearly have some people that love technology, love gaming. And so we created a page within our site that was focused on StarCraft 2. And so through that particular site, there was actually a connection made with our director of product development and one of the folks that's actually on the East Coast. And that was a connection that was made through a seemingly unrelated, unwork-related connection. But what was found out between these two is that they actually share a lot of the same beliefs in technology. They have a lot of the same knowledge around specific technologies, around integration technologies. And so what happened in that situation was a connection was made by accident, but it netted the fact that we actually hired this guy into the product team. So those are the types of scenarios that actually occur in real life every single day. And the argument here is that if you minimize the number of users that can contribute in this pilot organization, those types of connections will not occur. So if John, who was on the East Coast, was not part of our pilot for our social technology, then the director of product development and John would not have had that connection, and that is very true. So just know that is one of the arguments that's out there. So it's our belief that if you execute a pilot, you need to make sure that you have a significant cross-section, and just know that this is not necessarily, you're not going to realize all of the benefits of the deployment through a pilot, but the benefits that you realize from executing a pilot are worth it, and we'll get into some of those in a little bit. So what somebody would say that wants to do a pilot is they'll probably say something like, well, deploying to the entire enterprise without knowing cultural implications is risky. Very, very true. Also, you could also say that not knowing with true clarity the technical limitations of the product that you're deploying could devalue it within the organization. So let's say, for example, you have somebody in India who has limited bandwidth, and you just roll out the solution to the entire organization. Well, that person in India might not have the experience or the user experience with the software that would encourage adoption by that person. So, identifying some of those technical limitations as well as cultural limitations within the enterprise could be risky. So the ability to find experts, again, going back to that previous example, really what John on the East Coast was he was an expert. And one of the benefits of these types of technologies is the ability to find experts, not necessarily via some self-proclaimed expertise in any given technology. Some solutions out there will allow you to, say that you're skilled in, whether it's project management or agile or C#, what have you. So you can self-proclaim your skills assessment. Where what these technologies attempt to do is they attempt to identify experts by their contribution to the community. So the argument here is that when you execute a pilot, that particular value proposition will be limited, and it's absolutely true. The fewer users that you have, the less likely you are to find the actual experts in your organization. That's not to say that you're not going to find any experts, that you're not going to have people that do not know about each other actually connecting. It's just saying that as you deploy to a larger community, the finding of experts will increase. And so the argument here is just simply that when planning a pilot, what you want to do is you want to have a cross-section of pilot users that represent all disciplines. And we will reiterate this later, but when you pick your pilot community, do not limit yourself to those particular users. So let's say, for example, you think that someone from customer service should be part of the pilot. Fantastic. So they're part of the pilot as day one. But if that customer service representative thinks that Jerry in customer service should also be include them in the pilot. Get the people that are naturally going to use this technology into the pilot community. So again, you might define 10 to 20% of the total user population for your initial pilot, but don't limit yourself to that. Feel free to invite users in as the pilot moves on. So another argument for not doing a pilot is that if the scope of the pilot does not represent the mainstream business activity, meaning if it doesn't touch enough people during normal business activity, then you're not going to see really an effect. And so this just simply speaks to the fact that user adoption of social technologies is, oddly enough, dependent on user adoption, right? So what this is saying is that by having a larger cross-section or a larger user community participating in the conversations, you're more likely to realize value. And that's absolutely true, but that's not to say that you will not see value in doing a smaller subset. So again, we promote a very mathematical, pragmatic approach to executing a pilot where it's extremely deliberate. We set these expectations with our customers that, hey, here are some of the things that we expect to see. Here are some of the things that you can expect to see as you increase your user adoption or increase your user participation, so our customers know what to expect going into the pilot. So many of the use cases for the social business demand scale, and that's absolutely true. The one argument that I would have here is that, what is the number? What is the number? What equals scale? If you're a 40-person organization, if you're a 20-person organization, does this mean that you simply do not have the scale to realize the benefit of social software? If you're 40 people within the same building, maybe that argument's true, but if you have any distribution whatsoever, if you have any field organization, if you're only in one building, yeah, maybe that small user community might not benefit. But if you have any geographic distribution, having this type of software will work. And so the scale argument, what is the right number is really what we ask there. So what we say here is just simply that the use cases that you define when deploying your pilot should be based on your knowledge of the organization. Literally every pilot that we've done for every customer, they always have different business scenarios. They seemingly have similar objectives for becoming a social enterprise, things like, increased collaboration, increased ideation, increased morale. They seemingly have similar large objectives, but the business cases or the use cases are always different. If you take an organization, whether it's a talent management organization, their needs and actually them meeting with their particular clients is of extreme value to the entire organization. Just knowing that they're having a meeting with their client is critical. So again, those scenarios are significantly different between organizations. All right, so if you were to execute a pilot, the way that we like to execute our pilots is as follows. So we like to follow what's known as the Rogers adoption curve, which basically states that your adoption increases kind of in stages, and really the pilot should be focused on the first two chunks, so the innovators and the early adopters. So you're going to get about a 16% cross-section of the total user population. And so obviously we would like to identify innovators and early adopters in each one of whether they're departments or segments within the organization. It's not necessarily something that can always occur, but we do want to encourage the inclusion of executive level folks, because for some weird reason, when the executives are involved in an organization and in a particular technology, people tend to gravitate. We like to have a fixed duration type of a pilot, and really what it's all about is collaborative change management. So figuring out and predicting how people are going to use this technology, this new communication medium to increase their productivity and realize some of those values, increase collaboration, finding of experts. And really we believe in a much more pragmatic approach to driving adoption. So once you're done with your initial pilot, with those 16%, 20%, immediately after, you're going to go for that early majority. Now, you might, in fact, open up the system to the entire organization, to the remaining 84% or whatever, but you'll focus on achieving that early majority number. So you'll literally have campaigns to increase user adoption with a certain subset of users. And again, just to reiterate, our pilots are focused more on those innovators and early adopters. And what we do is we have questionnaires and checklists as to what makes an early adopter, how do you identify an innovator. So we walk you through that. All right, so the next step is, what are some of the things that you should expect? What are the goals that you should have for your particular pilot? So first and foremost, we want to enlist the innovators and the early adopters, right? And so just to reiterate again that we do not want to set our pilot participants in stone. So you might logically come to the conclusion that these 10 or 20, 50 people should be part of the pilot, but don't limit that. If during the pilot you find that there are other people that could provide value and are actually asking for this, feel free to invite them. Again, the more people you get involved, the more value is realized. Some of the goals again are to identify the technology shortcomings, whether it's the deployment of mobile applications or the connectability, from geographically challenged locations, if you will. Also, we want to identify cultural barriers, meaning, some people just do not put themselves out there. They will be lurkers, and so what you try to do is you try to identify, who are the people contributing content, what's the ratio between contributors and readers, how do we increase the level of comfort with actually putting an opinion out there. A lot of people will not start conversations. A lot of people will comment on conversations. A lot of people will actually consistently be a naysayer of basically anything within the environment. I mean, these are actually things that happen quite often, and we just need to know that they're out there. And again, just to go back to that identification of the expected levels of participation, so if you go back to the belief system that you can just install it and they'll come. There is some truth in that, right? So if the software is truly valuable in somebody's daily business activities, then they're going to use it. But this really is a cultural shift where you're not expected, but you're encouraged to share more openly, share ideas, share what it is that you're doing, share what you think is important. So we encourage that kind of open sharing of ideas, and this is really what we want to do in the pilot, is just get a gauge as to where we think that participation will come from. All right, so what should be the outcomes of your pilot? What we want to do is we want to gauge the initial value perception. So of the people that you invited to the pilot, did they see any value, or what explicit value did they see in using this new technology? Again, we want to look at usability and technology challenges. So was the software inviting? Was it engaging? Was it hard to use? Are you actually going to require some form of a training? Nice thing about Pulse and other technologies like it is usually they're modeled after, Facebook, which is probably the most widely used piece of software currently in the world. 600 million users. So your barrier to entry is very small. If you look at the cross section or the demographics of who uses Facebook, it goes, I don't know, all the way from 12 to 60, 70, 80 years old. So it's not limited by any of the, demographic technical challenges that you would expect. Clearly, the younger demographic is much more open to this form of communication. So we need to focus on some that aren't as comfortable. So also the identification of new business scenarios. It's really important. There are clearly naysayers within any organization that say things like, Facebook is for kids or Twitter is for narcissists. And so you will have those challenges internally, and there will be people that state that. And so one of the things that will be extremely valuable to you is being armed with actual business scenarios that maybe your CEO thought of, maybe the head of product development thought of. Actually being able to share those real-life business scenarios with any of the naysayers is extremely powerful, because at the end of the day, you really want to bring them on board, and you want them to see the value of this just as you would any other person in your organization. So also you can expect to have champions identified. There are going to be people that really gravitate to this form of communication, whether it's because of their personality, they like to put themselves out there, they like to share their ideas, they like to get comments, they like to have the CEO, like their post. You're going to find champions, and those will be your allies throughout the entire organization that can go out and, really talk up the solution and talk up this kind of new way of collaborating. And then at the end of the pilot, you should also know, if you turned it off, if you turned the solution off after executing a pilot, who would care? Like, would it change? Would people get upset? Because at the end of the day, you want that answer to be absolutely yes. That it becomes just ingrained in how people communicate. It's how they expect to work. It's a piece of software that they just expect to be there. People are much more demanding of usability because of the tools that are available in their private lives or their personal lives. So again, we want to get to a point where if you turned it off, some people would be upset. So what can you do to prepare for a pilot? Well, one, what you can do is identify innovators and early adopters, right? So just put together a list of who you think would adapt or adopt this particular technology seamlessly. They have no, personal barriers to contributing to this type of a system. So you can put together a logical list and then have a meeting, have an initial kickoff with those folks and say, this is what we're thinking, and then guaranteed those people will say, well, no, we should include, Robbie or Barry or what have you. So they'll bring in people they think should be included here. Also identifying the objectives for the social business. So like I said, they're very similar objectives across the organizations that we've worked with. So I wouldn't say that these are going to be radically different. Increased collaboration, the ability to communicate with workers that are out in the field more effectively, the ability to communicate with workers that don't necessarily have, whether it's a desktop or an email address. So there are some pretty common patterns that happen there. But also, before you execute the pilot, you want to identify some of the usage scenarios. An example might be what you want to do is you want to tell your innovators and early adopters some examples of what you might want to put out there. Like if you're deploying a blog or a wiki type of a technology, what would you expect them to blog about? What are some of the ideas? Because a lot of times people just need to have someone tell them, hey, why don't you try this out? They'll go do it, and they'll start to realize value, and they'll start to put the pieces together themselves. So again, putting together some of the sample scenarios would be pretty beneficial. So the scenarios that we typically put together are something like this, where we look at each one of the departments, each one of the divisions, and put together kind of a sample scenario. So here we're talking about supporting sales. What we do is we identify how they used to work. So before Pulse, they would conduct some customer research via CRM. Maybe they would send a ton of emails and get elicit feedback from folks. Maybe they would, look at their mobile device and review all their emails, really to get up to speed on this particular customer. And what we say afterwards, let's say that you're just deploying microblogging. What we'll say is that, hopefully your microblogging technology allows your systems to contribute to the conversation. So here we're saying that, hey, the salesperson automatically receives information from CRM directly from within Pulse. They search Pulse for relevant information. They reach out to the entire company for information about the customer, using this microblogging technology. And then they use Pulse in the field to interact on a real-time basis. So we want to identify each one of the different business functions and create a scenario. Another way might be in supporting your line of business. So an example would be, hey, let's say that we're rolling out a new process for collecting and processing account information. Before Pulse, what you would do is you'd form a committee and you would set up meetings. You'd send out a company-wide email to announce the changes, and then you would reply to individual email support to support the employee understanding. So it would be very tactical. So in Pulse, we would create what's known as a page where community members could discuss the proposed changes. It would be private in nature, so they could collaborate via conversations and sharing. They would review and approve the documentation in Pulse and leveraging the SharePoint integration. Then they would announce those changes through Pulse, so everybody would be able to see that piece of information. And then you would create an employee training page or community, whatever it is that you want to call it, to support continuous learning about this new process. The challenge with sending out this mass email that documents the changes in policy, usually what happens when somebody has a question on that, yes, they might get it answered through email, but that response is not available to the larger community that might in fact have the same question at a later date. And so what we're trying to do here is minimize the number of times that the director of HR gets asked, how do I change my benefits? If you have one location that has the common questions and answers and how to do that, that would save a lot of time and save a lot of effort. So another usage scenario would be around supporting your supply chain. So for example, a delivery from your company to a customer is due, but the delivery truck has broken down. So before, what would happen is the delivery person would call in, they'd wait for repairs, the repair team would report the issue, the company would contact the customer after receiving the information and schedule a new delivery. with a technology like Pulse, the delivery person can contact the company via Pulse and say, hey, submit a ticket for the repairs, and then simultaneously the repair team would receive a ticket while the company would see the issue and contact the customer. So again, it's about increasing the visibility of significant events that are occurring within your organization. So what are some of the activities that you should do during your pilot? So you're executing this 30, 60-day pilot. You should promote conversations. If you're the champion, if you're kind of leading the pilot, you should promote conversations within the tool itself. You should also consistently post, how to do things, make recommendations to certain individuals. Also review the activity. If you included somebody in the pilot and you're noticing that, hey, they're not participating at all, feel free to reach out to them. Say, hey, is there a certain barrier? Are you, is the software not working for you, or is it more of it just doesn't fit into how you work? Really at that moment when people are not using the software or not using the solution, that's the perfect time to figure out exactly why, because they have it in their head. And again, eventually, when you actually, encourage usage, those people will eventually adopt as well. Some of the things that we like to do specifically is we like to invite, the users that are not seeing value in the system to kind of user groups and see exactly what they're thinking. All right, so we have about 10 minutes left. What I'm going to do now is just run through some quick tips for Enterprise 2.0. So first of all, determine your goals. And again, a lot of these goals we've seen across several of our clients are pretty common. Increasing collaboration, forging relationships with unreachable employees, whether they're out in the field or just unknown. A lot of organizations, if you're 55,000 people, how could you possibly know that this particular employee in a particular store has a really good idea? Improve employee morale and organizational culture. One of the things that we've seen quite often is just simply the fact that when somebody posts something and their boss or a CEO or something actually likes that post, that naturally increases morale. Also, just realize that this kind of concept of immediate ROI is it's not necessarily realistic. The ROI of this type of solution is really based on your particular goals. Next is to prepare for deployment. So you can establish a committee identifying those power users and the innovators and the early adopters. You can have a test group to get actual experience and figure out who your champions or your go-to people are within the organization. And then also, specifically within Pulse, we have pages. It's just a concept of, having a topic or a discussion that's about. It's basically topic-based. So what we recommend is creating, for example, a new employees page where HR preloads a series of questions and answers that is now, it's just a knowledge repository that people can go to. We also allow the ability for business systems to pulse, so to speak. So, for example, if you have a CRM system and you want wins and losses to be pulsed out into your conversations, you can do that as well. We recommend that you do some of that work up front. Also, allow your users, make sure that your users know that this system integration exists, because once again, they'll come back to you with ideas on the systems that they would like to see pulsing. So determine your organization's rules for use and incorporate into training before deploying the product. So we are absolutely of the belief system that the software should be, in terms of pointing and clicking and typing, easy enough to use that you do not require any training. There are some advanced capabilities around system integration, around the creation of pages that don't necessarily require training, but they just require some guidance on our recommended usage pattern. So incorporate that before deploying out the product. Also keeping an eye on follow-through and follow-up. Know that it'll take time to grow adoption, and that's why we really focus on that adoption curve. We focus on, that 16, 18, 20% initially, and then we try to go for that larger group. So just know that it's going to grow over time, and focus your efforts on promoting the solution to different groups over time. Also make sure that your executives, they don't necessarily have to be CXO level folks, but make sure that highly influential individuals are participating in conversations within Pulse. So make sure that they become role models. And then also, we also like to do pre and post deployment surveys. So one of the things that we like to do is send out an employee survey prior to rolling out Pulse, kind of get a sense of what the company's morale is like, and then 6 to 12 months afterwards, we'll send out the same survey, kind of see where people are at, because that'll be a direct link back to employee morale. And anytime that you can have a survey that quantifies one of your particular objectives, we'd recommend doing that before the deployment, and then 6, 12 months afterwards. All right, so to finish off the webcast, we did just want to give you some insight into exactly what Pulse is. So again, Pulse is an activity streaming technology that allows you to share thoughts and ideas, files, links, and images. It allows you to leverage, the liking concept, so that, again, that's an employee morale plus a data reach perspective. We also allow you to follow people and systems, pages, and phrases. Those are really the key tenets, as well as this concept of lists that I'll talk to in a minute. But you can follow systems and pages that will affect your activity feed. You can have public and private conversations. You can create conversations that are based on events that occur within systems. So once again, if you want to know anytime a new account is created in CRM or your ERP system and you want other people to know about that, you can create pulses that hit their activity feeds. And people have the opportunity to follow that particular system itself. You can also leverage external sites such as Twitter to discover conversations that are happening in the public domain. And then you can follow phrases. So anytime somebody mentions a word within Pulse itself, you can follow that word so that that'll hit your activity feed. And really what we're trying to do here is give you many different options to customize the information that's presented to your feed. So the more users you have within this type of environment, the quicker you'll realize that the amount of data that's projected to these people can soon become overwhelming. So what we've done is we're allowing you to follow phrases, and we're allowing you to follow also these things called lists, which basically aggregate phrases, pages, and people together into concise lists. So you can follow those particular lists, and the way that I use this internally is I actually follow lists and phrases, and I don't necessarily follow people. So I'm more interested in what people have to say across any number of topics as opposed to just what individuals have to say. Also, Pulse is really acts as this social layer between all of your systems. So Pulse can be embedded within your ERP system, whether it's SAP, Oracle, or Dynamics. It can be embedded in your collaboration software for like SharePoint or Drupal. It can also be integrated into your CRM system. Also, any custom applications. So what this allows you to do is have conversations that occur across all of your business systems, but are actually aggregated into this social layer, which is Pulse. And also note that any of these conversations, whether they're happening in CRM or SharePoint, can all be aggregated and distilled down to their mobile device. As well as if you are a SharePoint shop, we have complete integration with SharePoint. So if you wanted to leverage My Sites and you wanted to leverage Pulse's activity streams within those My Sites, we give you a web part that allows for that integration. All right, so at this point, we do have just a couple minutes for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and see if there are any questions that came through.
have some questions come through. I wanted to thank you for this presentation, by the way. Just as a reminder to everyone to ask a question, click on the Q&A verbiage located in the toolbar on the top left side of your screen, type your question, then click the Ask button. The first question was, does this technology replace traditional ways of communicating?
No, I don't think it replaces. I think, well, I know it doesn't replace. So one of the things to keep in mind is that, each, whether it's email or phone, they all have different profiles for what they're valuable for. So this definitely does not replace it. It's just an extension. It's yet another form of communication. But again, we think that this type of conversation should happen within any business system. So it's not yet another destination, but it is another medium for communication.
Thanks, Jason. The second question that came through was, what kind of business systems should these E2.0 products work with?
Well, so really any system that promotes events, or actually that results in events. Clearly you want to integrate with your collaboration software, whether it's SharePoint or something else. You definitely do not want to circumvent that. You want it to leverage your CRM systems because a lot of valuable customer information is usually kind of locked in those systems. Only the people who directly access, for example, CRM know about an opportunity. So really they should talk to pretty much any of the systems that are out there that result in business events.
Thank you. That sounded very helpful. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to type them in at this time. In the meantime, I'm going to click through a few polling questions, and we greatly appreciate your feedback. First question, was this content helpful for your business? Yes or no? A few more seconds. All right, thank you. Please rate the presentation content. Excellent, good, or poor. A few more seconds. All right, thank you. Last polling question, would you like us to schedule a follow-up? Yes or no? A few more seconds for everyone. All right, thank you. If there are no further questions, we'd like to thank Jason again for the wonderful presentation. We'll be forwarding out the recorded version of this presentation when it becomes available. If you have any further questions about the presentation, please feel free to email Jason. And Jason, do you have an email up on the slide?
Let's see. I think I have some. Let's see. So yeah, pulseinfo@neudesic.com comes to me. So just pulseinfo@neudesic.com.
Perfect. Thanks, Jason. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webcast. You're now free to disconnect. Thank you.